My daughter-in-law convinced my son I was losing my mind, so I recorded every conversation and played them at Christmas. The whole thing started about 18 months ago when my son got married to this woman, who seemed absolutely perfect on the surface. She was charming, articulate, and had this way of making everyone feel like they were the most important person in the room when she spoke to them. I should have trusted my gut instinct that something felt off about her overly sweet demeanor, but I wanted my son to be happy more than anything in the world. At first, the little comments were so subtle, I almost missed them entirely. During family dinners, she would casually mention how I had repeated the same story twice in one evening, or how I seemed confused about what day it was when she called earlier that week. My son would just nod along, looking concerned, while I sat there feeling like I was losing my grip on reality because I genuinely couldn't remember doing these things she was describing. The incidents became more frequent and more concerning as the months passed by. She would call my son after visiting me and tell him I had left the stove on, or that I had forgotten to lock my front door, or that I seemed disoriented about basic things like what year it was or who the president was. Every single time she shared these stories, I felt a deep sense of dread because I had no memory of these events happening at all. My son started treating me differently, speaking to me in that patronizing tone people use with elderly relatives who might be developing dementia. He would ask me multiple times if I remembered to take my medications, even though I had never missed a dose in my entire life. He started calling me every single day to check on me, which at first felt caring but quickly became suffocating when I realized he was essentially doing wellness checks. The breaking point came when she convinced him that I had gotten lost driving to the grocery store and had called her in tears, completely confused about where I was. According to her version of events, she had to drive around for 2 hours looking for me before finding me parked in a random parking lot, crying and disoriented. The problem was that this entire scenario was completely fabricated because I had been home all day working in my garden. When my son confronted me about this supposed incident, I tried to explain that it never happened, but he just looked at me with such pity and concern that I started questioning my own memory. She had planted seeds of doubt so expertly that even I began to wonder if I was developing some kind of cognitive decline that I wasn't aware of. The gaslighting was so systematic and convincing that I started keeping a detailed journal of my daily activities just to prove to myself that I wasn't losing my mind. That was when I decided to start recording every single conversation I had with her, using a small digital recorder I bought online. I told myself it was just for my own peace of mind, to have proof of what was actually said during our interactions. The recordings revealed a completely different person than the sweet, concerned daughter-in-law. She pretended to be around my son and other family members. In private, she would say things like how she couldn't wait for me to be out of the picture, so she and my son could inherit my house. She would mock my appearance, calling me pathetic and saying I was just a burden on everyone around me. The most chilling recording was when she detailed her plan to convince my son that I needed to be placed in a memory care facility, where she figured I would deteriorate quickly and die within a few years. The recordings also captured her admitting to lying about all the incidents she had reported to my son. She bragged about how easy it was to manipulate him because he trusted her completely and wanted to believe he was being a good son by looking out for his aging mother. She even laughed about how gullible he was, saying he would believe anything she told him as long as she presented it with enough fake concern and tears. Armed with hours of recorded evidence, I spent weeks planning exactly how to expose her during our annual Christmas gathering. I knew I had to be strategic about it because if I just told my son what she was doing, he would probably think it was another sign of my supposed mental decline. I needed irrefutable proof that would make it impossible for her to deny or manipulate the situation. I set up a small Bluetooth speaker in the living room and loaded all the most damning recordings onto my phone. During Christmas dinner, while everyone was relaxed and enjoying themselves, I casually brought up how grateful I was for my daughter-in-law's concern about my health over the past year. She immediately launched into her usual performance, telling everyone how worried she was about my memory and how she was just trying to look out for me. That was when I pressed play on the first recording, where her voice came through crystal clear as she mocked my son for being so easily manipulated. The room went completely silent as everyone processed what they were hearing. My son's face went through about 5 different emotions in the span of 30 seconds, from confusion to recognition to absolute devastation. The second recording was even more damaging because it captured her detailing her plan to get me committed to a facility. She had researched local memory care places and was planning to tell my son that I had wandered out of my house in the middle of the night, confused and disoriented. According to her plan, this would be the final straw that convinced him I needed professional care. By the third recording, she had stopped trying to defend herself and just sat there with her mouth open, probably trying to figure out how to spin this situation to her advantage. My son looked like he had been hit by a truck, staring at his wife like he was seeing her for the first time. The rest of the family was stunned into silence, processing the fact that they had witnessed systematic emotional abuse disguised as concern. The fourth recording was the one that sealed her fate completely, because it captured her talking about how she planned to isolate me from my friends and family members. She wanted to convince everyone that I was becoming dangerous and unpredictable, so they would stop visiting or calling me. Her ultimate goal was to make me so lonely and desperate that I would become completely dependent on her version of events. What happened next was something I never could have anticipated, even with all my planning. My son stood up from the dinner table and walked straight out of the house without saying a single word to anyone. His wife tried to follow him, but he told her not to come near him and drove away alone. The rest of the family sat in stunned silence for what felt like hours, trying to process everything they had just heard. My daughter-in-law tried to convince everyone that the recordings were somehow fake or taken out of context, but the evidence was too overwhelming and specific. She knew details about my daily routine and personal habits that she could only have known from carefully observing me for months. Her fake tears and protestations of innocence fell flat when confronted with her own voice describing her manipulative plans in detail. The aftermath was more complicated than I had expected because my son was devastated by the betrayal. He had genuinely believed he was protecting me and doing the right thing by monitoring my health and safety. Discovering that his wife had been systematically lying to him about my condition shattered his trust in ways that extended far beyond their marriage. For weeks after Christmas, my son avoided both of us completely while he tried to process what had happened. He felt guilty for not believing me, angry at his wife for manipulating him, and confused about how to move forward with his life. I wanted to reach out to him, but I also understood that he needed time to work through his emotions without pressure from anyone. The divorce proceedings started about 6 weeks later, and they were absolutely brutal because she tried to claim that I had somehow manipulated the recordings or that my son was having a breakdown. Her lawyer argued that the recordings were obtained illegally and shouldn't be admissible, but they had already served their purpose of revealing the truth to my family. During the legal process, even more disturbing details emerged about her past relationships and patterns of manipulation. Apparently, she had pulled similar stunts with previous boyfriends, convincing them that their family members were problematic or mentally unstable. She had a documented history of isolating partners from their support systems through systematic lying and emotional manipulation. The most shocking revelation came when my son's lawyer discovered that she had been researching my financial situation and had detailed knowledge of my assets and investments. She had been planning to convince my son that I was becoming financially irresponsible and needed someone to manage my money. Her ultimate goal was to gain access to my accounts and property through a power of attorney arrangement. My relationship with my son slowly began to heal over the following months, but it took a long time for him to trust his own judgment again. He had been so thoroughly manipulated that he questioned every decision he had made during his marriage. We started having regular coffee dates where we would talk about everything that had happened, and gradually he began to forgive himself for being deceived. The experience taught me that sometimes the people who appear most concerned about your welfare are actually the ones plotting against you. It also showed me the importance of trusting my instincts when something feels wrong, even when everyone else seems to believe a different version of reality. Most importantly, it reinforced my belief that the truth always comes out eventually, even when it takes careful planning and patience. Looking back, I realized that my decision to record those conversations was probably the most important thing I ever did to protect myself and my relationship with my son. Without that evidence, I might have ended up in a memory care facility, isolated from my family and friends, while she took control of my life and assets. The recordings saved me from a nightmare scenario that could have destroyed everything I had worked for. My son and I are closer now than we have been in years, partly because we went through such an intense experience together. He has learned to be more skeptical of people who seem too good to be true, and I have learned that sometimes you have to fight for your own sanity and dignity. We both came out of this situation stronger and more aware of how easily people can be manipulated by someone with bad intentions. The woman who tried to destroy my life eventually moved to another state, probably to find new victims to manipulate. Last I heard, she was engaged to someone else, and I sometimes wonder if she is pulling the same tricks on his family members. I hope they are smarter than we were and see through her act before she can cause too much damage. The whole experience lasted about 2 years from start to finish, but it felt like a lifetime of stress and uncertainty. Some days I still can't believe that someone would go to such elaborate lengths to manipulate and control other people. But I learned that there are individuals who view other people as nothing more than obstacles to overcome or resources to exploit. I kept all the recordings as evidence, and sometimes I listened to them to remind myself of how important it is to trust my own perceptions and memories. They serve as a permanent record of what really happened during those months when I thought I was losing my mind. The recordings also remind me that I am stronger and more resourceful than I ever imagined possible. The most satisfying part of the whole ordeal was watching her face when she realized that her carefully constructed lies were being exposed in front of everyone she had tried to impress. For months, she had been the perfect daughter-in-law, fooling everyone with her fake concern and manipulative tears. In the span of about 20 minutes, her entire facade crumbled as her own words condemned her. My family still talks about that Christmas dinner sometimes, referring to it as the day the truth finally came out. It became a turning point for all of us, because it showed how easily we can be deceived by someone who knows exactly what we want to hear. It also demonstrated the importance of questioning things that don't feel right, even when everyone else seems to accept them as truth. The experience changed my perspective on relationships and trust in ways that I am still discovering. I am more cautious now about people who seem overly invested in my personal business, or who offer unsolicited advice about my life. I have learned to recognize the warning signs of manipulation and to trust my instincts when something feels off about someone's behavior or motivations. Sometimes, I wonder what would have happened if I had never started recording those conversations, if I had just accepted her version of events and allowed myself to be convinced that I was developing dementia. The thought of ending up in a memory care facility, confused and alone, while she took control of my assets and alienated me from my family, still gives me chills when I think about it. The recordings not only saved my sanity and my relationship with my son, but they also probably saved my life in a very real sense. Without them, I might have spent my remaining years in a state of manufactured confusion and dependency, never knowing that my decline was artificially created by someone who stood to benefit from my suffering. The truth set me free in the most literal way possible. Now, almost a year later, I am grateful for the whole experience in a strange way, because it taught me so much about human nature and the importance of standing up for myself. I learned that I am capable of strategic thinking and long-term planning when my back is against the wall. Most importantly, I learned that the truth is always worth fighting for, no matter how difficult or complicated the battle might be.